everybody. Welcome back to A People's Historian, the show where we read about half an hour of history together. My name is Jason Kishinev, and we are reading State of War, or the Secret History of the CIA and the Bush Administration. Remember, if you like what you see, like what you hear, whatever, hit the like and subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you get notified about future videos. Let's dig in. Chapter 5. Skeptics and Zealots. Ever since the U.S. invasion of Iraq and subsequent discovery that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction, officials in the Bush administration and the CIA have insisted that they truly believed before the war that those threatening weapons did exist. President Bush and his top advisors have repeatedly claimed that they did not exaggerate the threat, and top CIA officials have publicly argued that their ominous assessments that Iraq had ongoing chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons programs were fully justified by the available intelligence. But in fact, many CIA officials, from rank-and-file analysts to senior managers, knew before the war that they lacked sufficient evidence to make the case for the existence of Iraq's weapons programs. Those doubts were stifled because of the enormous pressure that officials at the CIA and other agencies felt to support the administration. CIA Director George Tenet and his senior lieutenants became so focused on providing intelligence reports that supported the Bush administration's agenda, and so fearful of creating a rift with the White House, that they created a climate within the CIA in which warnings that the available evidence on Iraqi weapons of mass destruction was weak were either ignored or censored. Tenet and his senior aides may not have meant to foster that sort of work environment, and perhaps did not even realize that they were doing it, but the result was that the CIA caught a fatal case of war fever. So I question the word fatal since the CIA is still around. I think reading this book on this show is getting me on CIA lists. That's what I think. FBI list, anyway. The report from Salasan al-Haddad and other family members of Iraqi scientists were not the only warning signs that were ignored. In fact, doubts about the quality of the intelligence on Iraq's weapons of mass destruction pervaded the ranks of the CIA before the war. One former CIA officer recalls a conversation he had in December 2002 with the chief of the Counter-Proliferation Division, CPD, of the Directorate of Operations. Remember, we invaded in 2003, so this is the year before. The unit within the CIA that was supposed to be in charge of recruiting spies and collecting intelligence on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and other countries. The division chief admitted during the conversation that the agency didn't have much intelligence on Iraq weapons of mass destruction. According to the former CIA officer, there were a lot of people who said we didn't have enough intelligence. There were a lot of people who... I'm going to reread that because I yawned. Excuse me. There were a lot of people who said we didn't have enough intelligence, the former officer added. Some CIA officials who were skeptical were shunted to the side by CIA management. Alan Foley, the director of the CIA Weapons Intelligence, Non-Proliferation, and Arms Control Center, WINPAC, can't believe they have an abbreviation for that, but of course they do, told a former colleague on the day of Secretary of State Colin Powell's UN presentation in February 2003 that the CIA simply didn't have the evidence to back up what Powell was saying to the world. This was a stunning confession from the man in charge of all of the CIA's analysis related to weapons of mass destruction. Yes. But it also was a signal that the professionals within the ranks of the CIA felt that they were being railroaded. I talked to Foley on the day of Powell's UN speech, and he said, "We just don't have it. It's not very good," a former colleague of Foley's later recalled. Despite his high rank, Foley felt outmaneuvered within the agency's management on the issue of Iraq, his former colleague said. After the war and the failure to find any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, Foley briefly came into the news as a result of a controversy between the CIA and the White House over the handling of the intelligence related to whether Iraq had tried to purchase uranium from Niger. In his 2003 State of the Union address, President Bush referred to reports that Iraq had been trying to buy uranium from Africa as evidence that Saddam Hussein was developing nuclear weapons. But the credibility of that reporting had already come into question before the president's speech, and it was later revealed that documents about supposed uranium sales by Niger to Iraq were forgeries. Foley was dragged into a public argument between Tenet and Condoleezza Rice over who was responsible for allowing such flawed intelligence to get into the State of the Union address. CIA officials told reporters that Foley tried to warn NSC staffer Robert Joseph, who was handling weapons of mass destruction issues at the White House, against including the material in the speech. The White House said Foley never told Joseph that the information was bad. Said to be fed up and bitter, Foley left the CIA not long after that battle. Another CIA source said that two analysts who raised questions about the reporting on Iraqi weapons programs before the war were smacked down by other officials in WinPAC, although the CIA source did not know what punishment the two suffered for their skepticism. The two analysts continued to work at the agency, and according to the CIA source, they later testified about their experiences to the independent WMD Commission. By contrast, more hawkish officials, even very junior analysts, found it easy before the war to bring their reports to the attention of the CIA leadership, as long as the reports tended to confirm the existence of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. One former CIA official recalled how Tenet's chaotic management style allowed even inexperienced analysts to get their reports directly to the CIA director without adequate vetting by more experienced professionals. Tenet chaired daily meetings on key issues, including both Iraq and counterterrorism, and those conferences were often crowded with mid-level and junior officials eager to get noticed by the director. By presenting their reports during these large conferences with top CIA management, these junior officers were able to short-circuit the normal analytical process. Intelligence reports that seemed to corroborate the administration's agenda could thus go directly from an ambitious junior analyst to George Tenet, who could then take them straight to the White House and George W. Bush. The CIA's mistaken embrace of intelligence claiming that a shipment of aluminum tubes was proof that Saddam was reconstituting his nuclear weapons program, was a prime example of that management disarray. I was in a meeting chaired by Tenet where you had kids from WinPAC, recalled a former official. During the meeting, the former official recalled, Deputy CIA Director John McLaughlin observed that he had heard that analysts at the Energy Department were skeptical that the aluminum tubes could be used for a nuclear program. And this young analyst from WinPAC, who didn't look older than 25, says, "Nah, that's bullshit. There's only one use for them," recalled the former official. And Tenet says, "Yeah? Great." So you had people sprinkled through the organization who felt like they could go right to the top, and no one was there to contradict them. One key nuclear weapons analyst in WinPAC, who has been identified in the press only as Joe, was one of the primary advocates within the agency arguing that the aluminum tubes were for use in a nuclear weapons program. The CIA had almost no other physical evidence to show that Iraq was developing nuclear weapons, and so Joe's tube intelligence reports brought him high-level attention. There are tubes. CIA sources say Joe was often able to deal directly with McLaughlin, circumventing the normal chain of command. The independent... The Independent Weapons of Mass Destruction Commission later concluded that the intelligence community's failure on the Iraqi nuclear issue was perhaps the most damaging of any of its errors during the run-up to the Iraq War. As the invasion of Iraq grew closer, an attitude took hold among many senior CIA officials. The war was inevitable. And so the quality of the intelligence on weapons of mass destruction didn't really matter. This attitude led CIA management to cut corners and accept shoddy intelligence. Other CIA officials believe one of the senior guys in the NE division, the Near East division of the Directorate of Operations, told me that it isn't going to matter once we go into Baghdad. We are going to find mountains of this stuff, recalled a former CIA official who left the agency after the war. This acceptance of weak intelligence among senior CIA officials appears to be the backstory to the famous so-called Downing Street memo. According to a former senior CIA official, the memo, the leaked British government document from July 2002 that provided a British assessment of the Bush administration's plan for Iraq, was written immediately after a secret conference in Washington between top officials of the CIA and British intelligence. The memo, dated July 23rd, reported that there was a perceptible shift in attitude in Washington about Iraq. The memo went on to say that military action was now seen as inevitable. Bush wanted to remove Saddam through military action, justified by the conjunction of terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. But the intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy. The memo reflected an assessment of the prevailing attitude inside the Bush administration offered to Prime Minister Tony Blair by Sir Richard Dearlove, the head of MI6, the British intelligence service. Just days before, Dearlove and other top MI6 officials had attended a CIA MI6 summit meeting held at CIA headquarters, in which the two sides had candid talks about both counterterrorism and Iraq. According to a former senior CIA officer, the summit meeting was held at the urgent request of the British. The American and British intelligence services are so close that under normal circumstances they hold an annual summit to discuss a wide range of issues in a relaxed setting. The year before it had been held in Bermuda, but after 9/11, Tenet had told other CIA officials he was too busy to be bothered with another conference with the British, particularly one held in a remote location. The British were very insistent, however, and kept pushing for the meeting, the former CIA official said. The MI6 officials made it very clear to their CIA counterparts that they had to sit down and talk immediately. CIA officials believed that Prime Minister Blair had ordered Dearlove to go to Washington to find out what the Bush administration was really thinking about Iraq. While Blair was in constant communication with President Bush, he apparently wanted his intelligence chief to scout out the thinking of other senior officials in Washington to give him a reality check on what he was hearing from the White House. I think in hindsight that it is clear that Dearlove was insistent on having the summit because Blair wanted him to find out what was going on, said the former CIA official. Tenet finally agreed to the conference as long as it could be held at CIA headquarters rather than out of town. The session was scheduled for Saturday, July 20th, 2002. The two sides ended up spending most of that Saturday together. One of Tenet's great attributes was his ability to develop warm relationships with the chiefs of Allied intelligence services, and Tenet had an especially good personal relationship with Dearlove. He was usually very candid with his British counterpart. During the Saturday summit, Tenet and Dearlove left the larger meeting and went off by themselves for about an hour and a half, according to a former senior CIA official who attended the summit. It is unclear what Tenet and Dearlove discussed during their one-on-one session, yet Dearlove's overall assessment was reflected in the Downing Street memo. The CIA chief and other CIA officials didn't believe that the weapons of mass destruction's intelligence mattered because war was coming one way or another. I doubt that Tenet would have said that Bush was fixing the intelligence, said a former CIA official. But I think Dearlove was a very smart intelligence officer who could figure out what was going on. Plus, the MI6 station chief in Washington was in CIA headquarters all the time, with just about complete access to everything, and I am sure he was talking to a lot of people. The poisonous climate in the U.S. intelligence community during the pre-war period was perfect for hustlers and fabricators eager for their own reasons to tell tales to the Americans. Many of them were Iraqi exiles who reported that Saddam did have weapons of mass destruction. There were warnings given to top CIA officials that some of the Iraqi exiles and defectors were lying, but these warnings were often ignored. Perhaps the most egregious example came in the case of an Iraqi exile who was given the apt code name of Curveball. That's a cool code name. The information provided by Curveball was critical to the Bush administration's case that Iraq was developing biological weapons. Curveball said that Saddam Hussein's regime had developed mobile biological laboratories that enabled Iraqi scientists to keep their bioweapons out of sight of UN's weapons inspectors. Secretary of State Colin Powell relied on information from Curveball in his presentation to the United Nations in February 2003. Later, the independent WMD Commission concluded that the intelligence community fundamentally misjudged the status of Iraq's biological warfare programs, and that the central basis for its misguided assessment was the reporting of a single human source, Curveball, who proved to be a fabricator. The commission observed that the Curveball story is one of poor asset validation by our human collection agencies, of a tendency of analysts to believe that which fits their theories, of inadequate communication between the intelligence community and the policymakers it serves, and ultimately of poor leadership and management. The Curveball story is also one of high-level confrontation between George Tenet and John McLaughlin on one side, and Tyler Drumheller, a genial and rotund man who was the chief of the European divisions in the CIA's Directorate of Operations, on the other. Drumheller tried to prevent Curveball's lies from getting into Colin Powell's UN presentation, and his experience provides a vivid glimpse into the hothouse atmosphere at CIA headquarters in the months before the invasion of Iraq. Thanks for joining me. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.